Hello, kids. Assalamu alaikum. This is Samiha Sarwar. Welcome to our Modern Age from Islamic Perspective, Week 4. Today, we are going to talk about four topics, actually. Muslim slaves, fall of Ottoman Empire, Muslims in the world wars, and Russian revolutions. So as we were talking about in our third week, we ended talking about World War I. So if you haven't seen that, I recommend you listen to that lecture first and then come to this week. Now, this week's topic is actually very important for Muslims all around the world. This topic is really important not only because this was the last of the Islamic empires, and indeed even one of the last empires at that, but also because it set the stage for the future problems in Middle East, the problems we are dealing with these days in Middle East, right? So that's why it is so important for us to understand or read more about what was going on that time that led us to this complicated situation as a Muslim in this today's world. So let's begin. Bismillah. So now, the Ottoman Empire. You know what? First, before we get into, let's talk about Muslim slaves, actually. Yeah. Let's go. No. Now, the European slave dealers came to West Africa to buy slaves, and African captured other Africans in the battle and would sell them to Europeans in return for weapons. As we have seen in our last lecture, some of the slaves being sold were also Muslim, as Islam was already established in West Africa at that time. Kidnapping. So, if you remember the triangular Atlantic slave trade, right? And so that was happening at that time. So Portuguese slave traders came to buy slaves in Africa to be sent to work on the plantages in the Americas. At first, they would buy the slaves that were sold on the local slave markets, but soon the demand for slaves outgrew the supply. So we know that. So now slave traders would raid villages, kidnap men, women, and children as soon as they got the ships to be transported. They were branded with hot iron as a slave. Many died on long journey to the Americas. Conditions on the ships were abominable, and food was scarce. Food was really little. Those that did make it to America would be sold into a life of slavery and abuse. Right? So, educated Muslim slaves. So let's talk about that. So Muslims had set up schools in West Africa for children, even for non-Muslims that time. Many Muslims were really well educated that time. They knew how to read and write. French travelers in West Africa noted that the Muslim population in Timbuktu was schooled, could read and write. Many knew parts of Quran and could discuss about it. French slave dealers Theophilus Connou wrote that when he visited New Guinea, he saw many elderly women in the morning and evening. They were reading Quran, so they knew how to read Arabic. So that was a language at that time. So they knew how to read and write and do dealing and business and contract and all these. So sometimes the slaves were more educated than their European masters that time. And these helped Muslim slaves work on less demanding jobs, such as they used to work as accountant. Their education also helped them to lead revolts against their masters sometimes. An estimated 20% of the current Muslim population in USA today are actually descendants from the Muslim slaves. So if we go to our next slide, the difficulties in practicing in Islam as a slave, definitely, right? So we need to start understanding those points. And Muslim slaves faced many difficulties in practicing Islam. It was almost impossible for Muslim slaves to leave their jobs to pray 5 times a day. It was merely a dream to make Hajj to Mecca. Most importantly, they had no access of copies of Quran or to Islamic schools, or they could so that they could teach themselves, they could learn themselves, or they could teach their kids about Islam. So many of the slaves were really, and they were imams, they were sheikhs, they were scholars, and so they tried to teaching others about Islam wherever they were sold and sent. So Muslim slaves, they were also, so let's talk about Quran, what was happening that time. Now, if a slave had some parts of the Quran memorized, they would teach it to others. And there was a high demand of copies of the Arabic Quran to be imported. Now, the merchants would import them and sell them to slaves in a very high price. And slaves actually, they had to save money from extra jobs because they were not get paid a lot, right? So they didn't able to buy a copy unless they could do some extra job. Sometimes it took actually years for save up the cost of one copy. The Muslim tried very hard to hold on Islam, but without Muslim institutions and it organized Islamic educations, and the knowledge in Islam really it started to fading out from their life. Each generation knew less about Islam than its predecessors, because if let's say the grandpa was a slave, and then he was able to teach his son a little bit, but then the son, when the slave son had their children, but then they were not able to teach much about, because by the time they were not able to go to the masjid, they were not able to go for practice and learn from the other scholars. So their learning was, and their faith was very compromised. So by the time it came to the son, maybe it was very faded. So yes, it was very difficult for them to practice. So now conversion of Muslim slaves. So to make things even harder, some Muslims were really baptized by force and converted to Christianity. Their masters were fined for every slave that were not converted. So the Muslims were not easily converted, and Reverend John Baptist Labatt really warned that the people should not accept Muslim slaves, as they never embraced Christianity. They tried very hard to hold on to Islam, even sometimes, even if they had to convert superficially, but secretly they still, in their heart, they used to remain Muslim. So if we go into the next slide, so revolts of Muslim slaves. So Muslims started to rebel against their enslavement because Muslims of Brazil formed the largest community of Muslim slaves in America. A revolt was organized by a group of scholars. Note written in Arabic were passed among the slaves, indicating they were planning how to rebel. Now, 300 slaves actually rebelled at that time. Their revolt actually failed, but it did not. But it definitely instilled fear of Muslim slaves in the Europeans, merchandisers who were actually trading slaves. Some were even sent back to Africa to avoid further revolts. So now let's move on to our next topic. I want you guys to have this understanding what was happening. It is really important because this understanding of industrial revolution and the effect in Muslims' life will lead us to understand more how the Ottoman Empire had fell. Okay, so let's go. So the Industrial Revolution affected almost every aspect of the life in Western countries. Goods were mass produced by machines instead of handcrafted, and production became mechanized in factory systems. The Industrial Revolution started in Britain, but quickly that actually spread to Europe and the United States as well. Okay, so let's see. So the first thing, I'm just going to go one by one topic. So what was happening, the situation in Europe? Okay, now the mass production of goods, became a need because they were producing a lot of things with the machine because it was easy to produce, right? Now business owners needed to produce massive amount of goods quickly and very cheaply. They wanted to take over the market and drive all the competitors out of the business. And they were pressured to get their goods to the market before anyone else does it. And this led to the invention of steam-powered trains and machines, and these business owners became very rich very fast. Now, craftsmen. Now, smaller business owners and craft workers found it very difficult to earn money in these conditions because they were making their goods by hand, right? Or small machines, not the steam-powered machine. They quickly found themselves out of work and unable to provide for their families. They were quickly replaced with business tycoons who had factories that made goods faster and cheaper. On the other hand, the situation in the Muslim world was very different. Now, why is it different? Actually, the Muslims were producing a large number of handmade goods made by creative and artist craftsmen. These goods were successfully exported throughout the world. There was no need for steam engine, big machine, and factories to produce masses in a short time, because people living in a Muslim world already had enough goods. Like you don't need. So this is where it comes at the Islamic aspect of your life, that whatever you don't need, you need to buy. You don't need to buy a lot. If you have few things and it's working, we don't want, as the Muslims, we don't want to be extravagant, right? In the Quran, Allah says that people who are extravagant, they are the brother of shaitan. So steam engines actually had already been invented in Muslim world for years before, but then they used to use the steam engine to cook food. The invention was never put to use in anything else, and there was no need for them to. The need did not arose. Now, so if I go to the next topic, it says organized guild. So what is an organized guilds? Okay, this is fascinating when I was reading all these about. So to organize the industries in the Ottoman Empire, the guilds, and you understand that what time I'm trying to talk. This is the Muslim world when Ottoman empires are still there, right? They haven't fallen yet. So that is the time I'm talking. It's kind of end of the Ottoman Empire, or maybe a little bit before ending of the Ottoman Empire. That's the time. So it's not the beginning, right? The Ottoman Empire was up for a long time. So to organize the industries in the Ottoman Empire, the guilds were established. The guild looked after a certain trade or craft. Some of its responsibilities were licensing a new business, paying out pensions to elderly members, healthcare, and settling standards for the trade. Each guild had its own sheikhs and masters to run it, and every craftsman in the empire had to belong to a guild, and if they had a complaint, they take it to the sheikhs or masters or of that guild. So it's like a union. It's like a union that all the business owners or craftsmen, they had to have a license, and that guilds will provide healthcare to them, right? So this was very organized, and you have to understand that that through these guilds, work was interwoven with spiritually, because they were sheikhs, they were Sufis, even though they were not into probably the right akida, but still they were they were practicing they were practicing, and spirituality was intertwined with their business and the economic life. So the guilds were often run by Sufi masters, as I was talking, and also they were doing so they were doing reasonable pricing. So the guilds took care. So what was that? What is a reasonable pricing? The guilds took care of the crafts and the craftsmen, but there was another side that had to considered. The people buying the crafted products, right? High prices or low quality products are problems, right? If you have high price, people can't buy it. Or if your people are paying, but the amount of money they're paying, the quality of the goods or products are very low. So this is also problematic. So that had to be considered, and that has to be run through by a guild. So the guild, this is why the government oversaw the guilds as well, to make sure the products being sold to the publics were a good quality and reasonably priced. Okay, so modernization. So in the Muslim world, okay, I'm just gonna go back. I still have something to talk about before I get into fall of Ottoman Empire. So modernization. So in the Muslim world, manufacturing was controlled by guilds. The government oversaw the guilds, so prices stayed reasonable. Products were distributed well using efficient routes. There was a system, and it was really efficient. Until the European traders, they came to the Ottoman Empire, they would buy up the raw resources at the bottom prices, leaving little left for the guilds. On the other hand, they flooded the market with the cheap mass-produced goods, and slowly the government in the Muslim world felt they had to catch up and modernize. So actually what happened, they allowed these Muslim traders to come into their country and start business. And that's where actually all the problems started, coming more. So we will learn about that as we go. So that lead us to our next topic, fall of Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire was formidable at its peak, but times were changing. By the end of 19th century, so nationalism had spread across the Europe, and World War broke out and forced everyone to choose a side. By the time the dust settled from World War I, the Ottoman Empire has actually disappeared. So we will talk about this time now, that how did that really happen and which side Ottoman Empire actually chose and what happened. So let's see what was going on. Before that, I'm just going to talk about one thing. So what is nationalism? I think in our first or second week, we talked about what is nationalism. I'm just going to recap one more time. So the idea of nationalism is that a group of people that would share customs, language, or ethnicity or a location, they should combine to form one nation. So Germany had become a one nation state and Italy soon followed. And in United States, the Civil War was fought and they emerged as a nation afterward. So, okay. And let's talk about Zionism. So this is actually a very important concept that we need to understand. It is an idea that is similar to nationalism. It is similar to nationalism, but the difference is, so the idea was of a country for the Jewish people. So until that point, the Jewish people didn't have a land. So they were never actually a political power until that point. So they never had a land, their own. Now, they were very scattered all across the world. In their scriptures, actually, they were promised a land for their own. So they were still looking for that. And however, they didn't have a land by that time, and they wanted to have a land of Canaan or Palestine. They actually had an eye for Palestine. The problem was that their idea of nationalism or Zionism, whatever you say, it's the same concept, right? You want to have a country where you're going to have share the same custom, you're going to share the same religion. So it's kind of, Zionism is kind of also nationalism. Now, it included a land that was already inhabited by other people, the Palestinians. So you want a land for yourself, but then the people are actually living there. Palestinians are still living there. It's not like it's an empty land that you want that. Anyway, so that was the problem, and that is the beginning of the problem that we're still seeing in this world, in this our era. So the Ottomans. Now, so the Ottomans ruling a large empire, such as Ottoman empires, takes a lot of money, and the government wanted to keep up with the products produced by Europe during their industrial revolution, and started to hire experts from Europe to advise them, and allowed European traders to set up business in the Ottoman Empire. SubhanAllah, and you have to understand that the empire grew larger. The Khalifa was not involved in much, and they were catching up with the industrialization. If you have taken the class that we were doing in the early modern age last year, we talked about that how the Khalifa was not involved directly in ruling the country or ruling the countries or ruling his own empire. He was not involved. So that actually led the weakening of your ummah. So the Ottoman Empire became weaker and weaker for the next few decades because the European merchants had bought up all the raw materials for their industrial revolution at prices that the local craftsmen could not compete with. So now the Ottoman Empire was no longer producing on its own products, but they are now buying products from Europe at a very steep price. People were getting poorer and poorer. At the same time, the state was no longer expanding. This meant not getting money from these conquests. So the government of the Ottoman Empire was getting poor as well. The government was having trouble ruling all of these faraway places because they were really far away from, and then the government was not giving thought about how they're going to reach to their country people, how they're going to they don't know how their country peoples are empire, how they're living their life, what is the problem they're going through. They're very disconnected from their own peoples. Now, modernization. So I think I talked about all these. Yes. So they were getting poor and modernization. So now the Europe exerted so much influence that they convinced the Sultan to modernize the Ottoman Empire. And you know what, Sultan, he was not ruling the country as Sharia. He was not ruling the country according to Sunnah. He was not paying attention to the poor. He was living a very luxurious life. He doesn't know how his country people, how his ummah is doing. They were not focused. Their akida got corrupted, and were far away from the Sunnah and from the Islamic teaching. So what happened eventually? And then eventually, and also one thing I would like to emphasize here, that if you look into when Umayyads and Abbasids time and Spain and Andalus, how it was focused on science and technology and studying and education, and they were building universities. They were focusing on the research, right? They were reading books, they were building books, and all these things were there. And people were also expanding their knowledge and practicing in Islam authentic way. And also they were doing at the same time the science and technology and all these. But if you look into the end of the Ottoman Empire, that they were also distracting and going away from the actual original Islamic law that they were supposed to follow. And at the same time, they were not focusing on this research and industry, all these things, what was happening around. So, subhanAllah, what happened eventually? So when the Europeans came into the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans had no clue like why this is happening, because they were so involved on their own life, focusing on their own luxury, their family luxury, all these things. Now, when the Europeans they came, they said, you know what, you have to modernize. You, instead of Islamic law, the Sharia, you have to start you have to start adapting English law, like other laws. Well, then the Sultan was convinced, and laws would be based upon the French example instead of the Sharia law. Schools would be secular, no longer ruled by ulamas. The religious scholars are there. The young people were exhilarated. They wanted to improve the Ottoman empires. So, you know what? They could compete with Europe. And that's what they were thinking, that because we are not accepting the like a non-Muslims law, we're not accepting the European styles, so that's why we're getting behind. But if you think deeply and if you analyze it from the Islamic perspective, that was not the reason, right? So anyway, so the older generation who still had that wisdom didn't see it as a beneficial. It meant that, you know what, we're losing our religion, we're losing our originality. Rather than fixing our mistakes, what we were doing in Islamic Sharia, we are actually getting into man-made laws. And that was the beginning of our destruction as a Muslim ummah. So these two generations, they actually clashed. Okay, now the revolution happened. So people became more dissatisfied and started to like the ideas of nationalism. Many groups within the Ottoman Empire wanted to wrestle free from the Ottoman rule and establish their own country. At first, the government was able to put down small rebellions against the state, but you know what, as there was less and less money to spend, the government was losing more and more control over the nationalistic groups. So in the Algeria was basically part of France. The merchants and experts from France were making all the rules and decisions. Then followed Egypt, so which was basically ruled by Britain. So if you look into my next slide, so this is called cup. It is not the cup of a tea that you guys see in the picture. This means the Committee of Union and Progress. So the younger generation, they liked the idea of nationalism and they founded organization. It was named CUP, C-U-P, the Committee of Union and Progress. They wanted to replace Ottoman Empire with a Turkish state. Okay, so the 1923, the Constantinople was named Istanbul and Ankara became the capital. All right, now the independence. 1912, the Balkan War started and Bulgaria and Serbia and Montenegro, they rebelled actually, sorry, I am sorry for the mistake here. So they rebelled against Ottomans, and they were victorious. Okay, and during the Second World War, and then Bulgaria fought the other two, Serbia and Montenegro and the Greece, and became independent. So this set the stage for the First World War. The Ottomans were left defeated and demotivated. So they were already defeated. They're already demotivated because they're losing their countries. So by the time World War I came, now World War I broke out. The CUP in the Ottoman Empire wanted to align themselves with Germany because, you know what, they thought that Germany would win. Why? Because Germany had better weapons. During the war, the sides were eventually matched. Britain wanted to attack the Axis power. If you remember what was the Axis power, so the Axis power from the east, they wanted to attack from the east, which meant that they had to go through the Ottoman Empire. So the Britain decided that they had to bring the already weakened empire down because by the time Ottoman Empire was weakened, right? And that was not because of the Europeans. That was, well, kind of, but then that was also their own fault as well. So let's look into our next slide. So Lawrence of Arabia. This is the concept. I want you guys to understand. And if you don't understand in one recording, I want you guys to listen to it over and over and read about it. This is a very important critical points or critical event that happened that led Muslim Ummahs what we are here today. Okay, now, in the Middle Eastern provinces of the Ottoman Empire, nationalism was taking roots as well. The King Saud wanted to establish an Arab nation. The Imam of the Mecca and Medina, Hussein ibn Ali, the head of the Hashemite family, they also wanted the same. So who was Hashemite family? To understand that, you have to go to early modern age, read a little bit before. Inshallah, next semester, we're going to take again the early modern age, and that might be the kids, you guys don't understand what is the importance of Hashemite family and the Saud family here. You will understand a little bit more of them time. So just for now, you understand the king of the Saud wanted to establish an Arab nation, and the Imam of Mecca and Medina, Hussein ibn Ali, he was the head of the Hashemite family, wanted the same. Because if you remember, the Ottomans are not Arabs, they are Turks, right? And so now the Arabs wanted to because that was the trend that time going on. They were like, becoming nationalists people. Now the Britain actually won the war Order One with their techniques, with their evil ideas, with the politics, with the techniques actually. What they did, they sent spies, officers, and support to both families. The Hussein ibn Ali's family and also the Saud families, Hashemite families. So they sent these people. They sent spies and got informations that what actually these people want. They got the news from inside. And then they used to send officers and they used to support both families in different times of their need. So so that the Britain, they gained the trust of those families. Now then, Britain promised that to both families, same thing. They said Saudis and Hashemites. They said, you know what? One of these officers, so one of these officers, his name was Colonel Thomas Edward Lawrence. And the Hashemites end up being the one helping actually the British. They led a rebellion and expelled the Ottomans from the Middle East. The British took Baghdad and Damascus. Subhanallah, see that actually they used the Muslims against the other Muslim group, and then they win. Then they won the war. Okay, now look into and that is one of the saddest situation what actually we had. So now the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So what is a Sykes-Picot Agreement? This is an important, very important event. So in the meantime, two Europeans, so remember the name of these two Europeans, Mark Sykes and the Francois George Picot. So that's why the two guys, their last names, Sykes and Picot. So they made an agreement. So they were meeting, they were diplomats. They were meeting secretly with a map and a pencil to decide how the region would be carved up among the victorious European power after the war. Imagine they divided the area between the British and the French with a bit for Russia, but nothing for Arabs. And this is known as Sykes-Picot agreements. They actually promised the Arabs they're going to do this, they're going to do that, right? But then eventually among themselves, they didn't do it. And they had the vision, they had the dream, and they believed in their vision, they believed in their dream. And that's how they act on as if the dream came true. So they started planning, carving the lands. So this is called determination. They were determined. They used their determination. They used their intelligence. Not only and they worked hard. They worked hard. Not only their weapons, and they just didn't use only weapons and people and all these. No, they used all these techniques. So this is what I was actually talking. They divided the areas between British and the French, a bit for Russia. So the Thomas Lawrence actually spoke Arabic. He learned Arabic language. He liked the dress. He dressed as Bedouin tribal dresses, and then eventually people used to call him Lawrence of Arabia. Okay, so he actually started living there, became like them, learned the language, so that he gained their faith, gained their trust. And eventually the Arabs, they trusted a non-Muslim and then fought against their Muslim brothers just because they were not Arabs. So promises and promises. So promise the Jewish. So at the same time, retain what they did. They promised the Jewish they could take Palestine, the land that was already promised to Hashemites, and the land that was already promised to the Saudis, and the British also wanted it for themselves. But in Palestine, the Arab themselves wanted to be nation as well. They wanted to be their own nation as well, right? They didn't want to be under the Ottoman Empire as well. So through their cunning planning, the British now had made sure the Ottoman Empire had lost all of its territories, Great Syria, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. All right, so move on to the next one. So now what happened? The Germany lost. Eventually, we know what happened in World War I. In 1981, actually, the Germans lost the First World War, and Ottomans had bet on the wrong side. The Kapp knew they were in trouble, so what did they do? They fled. They fled, leaving the Ottoman Empire without any government to rule it. Now, the British troops now occupied Istanbul itself. So who is Ataturk? All right, I know this, I think this class is getting a little bit too much for you guys, but this is a heavy topic. And this is a very heavy topic. And, as I said, you can listen it over and over a few times to understand this. Now, Ataturk. Resistance started bubbling up in the Ottoman Empire. This resistance was fed by nationalism, right? The people did not want to go back to being an Ottoman Empire, but they wanted a nation state like the Kapp had set out to create.
Now, Mustafa Kemal, he was known as Ataturk. He gained popularity. What he did, he drove out the British and declared a new nation state in 1923, Turkey. Then he became known as the father of the Turks. This country was to have one language instead of the many spoken, because earlier people used to talk in a different language over there. But he said, no, now from now on, we're going to talk about one language, and that will be Turkish. One language. He replaced the Arabic alphabet even with the Franco one. He declared the Turkey to be the secular state and with no ties between the government and Islam. All right. Now, this is a picture of Kemal Atatürk government when they declared Turkey as a secular state. So Turkey was the first Muslim country to be the secular state. Atatürk actually set up a parliament and made himself the president. He banned headscarf. He banned traditional fez. Actually, he did not ban, but he discouraged people to have beard. Being a military man, he would enforce these rules with an iron hand. Okay, so no one would be able to wear hijab that time. Breaking the rules meant imprisonment. He would put people in the prison. He went on to close down Sufi schools. He made the weekly holiday from Friday to Sunday. We know that as Muslims, Friday is our weekly Eid. It has our Jum'ah, and it is a very special day, and it has a special time after Asr and everything. So Friday is special for Muslims, but then he changed that holiday from Friday to Sunday for his country that time. So by the time he has done modernizing his country by 1925, he made one final decision, and that shocked the Muslim world. He declared that Islamic Caliphate has ended. It is dead. Even though there had not been an actual Khalifa or Sultanate for a long time, actually, right? The Khalifa was not involved directly. It was very weakened. But you know what? The idea that the Muslim world would not have one Khalifa, that was not clear to the people still, right? By the time many countries, small countries, they became nationalist and they became their independent country. But still in the people's mind, nobody still ended the caliphate. But by the time Atatürk, he just decided he's ending the caliphate. And yeah, it was very shock. It was a very shock to many people. And that's the last of the Islamic empires. The Ottoman Empire was officially no more. All right, so catching up. Most of the other Muslim countries were busy trying to be like Western countries, increased production and development, and they felt that they were very behind and they had to catch up. They were increasingly relying on European expertise, products, and supports in the race to catch up. Many would follow the Turkish model for a secular state. And subhanAllah, this is the end of the Ottoman Empire. As I was talking about, actually, all these. So now Muslims in the world were one. When history books talk about World Wars, 20th century, they often don't speak about how it actually impacted Muslim communities. Muslims played a role in both these wars in return. These wars shaped the future of their countries. Now, World War I, okay? At the time of the First World War I, many European countries had colonies outside of the Europe. As we learned about the last week, that when the Europe started fighting, what happened? In the colonies, also they started fighting. So when they started to fight with each other, it quickly became a world war. They also fought with each other in their colonies. The local people in these colonies were drafted in the armies of the fighting European countries. They did not have much choice. The colonies didn't have much choice. They were under the rule of these European countries because of the mandatory drafting. What is the drafting? It means that they were listed, okay? Many people ended up fighting for the European powers on both sides. So imagine the Europeans was colonizing many Muslim countries that time already in India, in the Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. Sorry, not Afghanistan. Like in that zone and that area, and the Dutch were also colonizing that part, right? As we talked about first lesson of our first lesson. So Britain enlisted almost 400,000 soldiers from India, largely from the Muslim populations. So imagine the British government, so they had to fight for the British against the Muslims, Ottoman Empire. This is disaster. Now the French drafted 445,000 Muslim soldiers from North Africa countries in Russia. Their armies were strengthened by almost 1.3 million Russian Muslims. Muslims would not only join as soldiers, Muslims were also laborers supporting the war through different jobs, cooks and carrier transporters, etc. About 500,000 Muslims worldwide supported the First World through their labor. If you want or not, like that, they had no choice. So now religious practices of Muslim world, Muslims in war. So what was happening? Well, often these Muslim soldiers brought their religious practices to the battle because, there were so many Muslims fighting that the army had to special cook serving halal meals for them. They would also be imams in the trenches. They would remind soldiers of their prayers and perform burial prayer, like a funeral or janaza, assist with the dying. And the officers in the allied armies would be especially impressed with how the Muslim would treat the prisoners of the war. And Muslims would make sure they had food and were safe and treated them with respect. I'm talking about those prisoners of war, even though many of these prisoners had done horrible things. Okay. So that was, I'm not going to talk about World War II of the Muslims because we haven't taken World War II. So inshallah, when we take World War II, we will talk about the Muslims part in World War II. Okay. So let's move on to our last topic, Russian Revolution. Okay. I'm just going to give me 1 second. Let me talk about Russian Revolution. It's not about, it's before Russian Revolution was actually main points. No, before main points, I have to talk about a little bit about Russian revolutions. Okay, so at the end of the 20th century, Russia owned a vast empire that covered 1/6 of the Earth's surface, and most of its people were pagans. We know who lived pagans actually. Who lived in a terrible poverty, but in the capital city of Saint Petersburg, wealthy nobles, they lived a life of luxury. So Russia was ruled by a powerful emperor or Tsar who believed he had been chosen by God. The Tsar was advised by officials from noble families, but most Russians had no say how their countries were running. Okay. So I'll keep the slides, the main points here, but I'll just elaborate each each topic. Okay. Now, and it was a time for change because many Russians were unhappy how the Tsars had so much power, and some wanted him to rule with the help of parliaments chosen by the people. Others wanted a revolution to get rid of the Tsars altogether. One group of revolutionaries were Bolsheviks, and led by Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, actually better known as Lenin. All right. Now, in 1905, revolution happened. In January 1905, over 150,000 workers, they marched to the Tsar's Winter Palace in St. Petersburg to protest about their dreadful working conditions, and the army fired on
on the protesters, killing over 100 people. Workers across Russia went on strike, and the Tsar Nicholas was forced to set up a parliament, but he made sure it had very little power. Then Russia went to the war. In 1914, Russia entered the First World War, exactly. So the Russian army suffered terrible defeats, losing over 1 million men in first 6 months at home. The war caused shortage of food, and people began to starve. Many Russians blamed Tsar for all these problems because, your own people cannot eat. They don't have job, right? But then you are now in war. So now by March 1917, St. Petersburg, which had been renamed as Petrograd, was running out of bread. They didn't have food. And then riots broke out and workers went on strike. And when the army joined in the riots, Tsar Nicholas realized that he had lost control and gave up the throne. A temporary government was set up that time, but it did nothing to solve Russia's problem, actually, and soon became very unpopular. And in November 1917, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, they seized the power and took control over the countries. Now, civil war. What is a civil war? Remember, when the people in this own country, they're fighting each other for a cause. Now, Lenin made peace with Germany and took Russia out of First World War. He is like, you know what? First thing, we have to get out of this war. We can't be in the war, losing our people, losing our money, and gaining nothing. So he made a peace with the British, and he got out of this First World War. He moved the capital to Moscow and gave land to the peasants and put workers in charge of the factories. Many wealthy Russians did not like these changes, and this led to a bitter civil war between the Bolsheviks, known as the Communist Party, and their enemies. Okay, so in 1918, the Tsar Nicholas and his family were killed by a group of communists. Well, in 1921, okay, if I go to the next topic, actually, you know what? Important dates. So that is important. So in 1921, the communists had won the civil war, and Lenin was in complete control of Russia. He began the massive task of rebuilding the country, which was in a very chaos after years of fighting. In 1922, Russia was renamed the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, also known as the Soviet Union. So this is a picture where actually Lenin is giving a speech among the people. Vladimir Lenin giving a speech in Moscow's square, Red Army who were leaving to fight the Polish-Soviet War in 1920. And you know what? I want you guys to critically think few things. So why does Russian peasants would have been excited upon hearing about Russian revolutions? Okay. Also think about how were Tsar's actions one of the causes of the revolutions, as I was talking, right? And why did Russia have a different experience than their nationalist favor than its European neighbors? If you think about it, all right, I'm going to talk about a little bit here on the topic number 3. I think you guys can figure out the first two, but the topic number 3 is then, in the Russia, people were not speaking in the same language. They were not having same culture. They were not having same customs. So what was their commonality? Their commonality was they were poor working class people. And what is nationalism? Nationalism is that you want to become a one state or a one country when you have a same kind of language, you speak in the same language, or you have a same race or same customs, same religion. So then communism actually was more popular, and their experience was different than the other European neighbors because they became communists. And what was their commonality in between? That they were poor, and then the communism actually worked better here because the concept of communism is that everybody will have kind of same amount of wealth. Nobody will own anything. So inshallah, in our next class, we will have a little bit more details about communism. Now, after the Tsar stepped down, why did the provincial committee eventually lose power to the Bolsheviks? Because what was happening? Because, if you think about it, that they were running out of bread. They didn't have food. The riot broke out and workers went on strike. They're like, we're not working anymore because what's the point of working? We don't have food. So when the army joined in the riots, the Tsars Nicholas really realized that, what, he had lost control and he gave up the throne. Now, why this provincial committee that was set up temporarily? Because what, they could not solve Russians' problem. So soon became unpopular, and that's why they lost power to Bolsheviks. Because the Bolsheviks, the Lenin, their idea, they were bringing the idea that they're going to work with the working people. Okay, they're going to focus on the need on the working people. And that's why eventually the country where everybody was like a poor and working class people, that was their commonality. They lost power with to the Bolsheviks. Now, how did the Bolsheviks change both production and distribution as well as communists in Russia? Okay, so yes, I want you guys to critically think about these questions. And before we finish today, let's watch two videos. I think you have heard enough about what I had to say. Now let's actually, okay, give me a second. Let me turn on this first.
Wix is.
I'm going to stop share. So revolution that shaped Russia. Okay, just watch this. I think it will give you a little bit of idea. I'm very sorry for the music and the background music for this. That's I couldn't find a better video than this. Okay, so give me a minute. Maybe reduce the music a little bit.
Okay, so that was one video, and I will have another video. Let me, okay. Okay, let's share the last video. And
February 1917, World War I rages. February 1917, World War I rages. The Tsar is away at the Eastern Front, having taken personal command of the army. Meanwhile, demonstrations and protests against food shortages, bread prices, mismanagement of the war, poor working conditions, and more boil over in the capital, Petrograd, aka St. Petersburg. The fighting and protesting continue for a few days before parts of the military join in with the crowd and arrest the Tsar's ministers. The provisional government, made up of moderate Duma ministers, takes over. Tsar Nicholas II abdicates, but rather than pass the throne on to his only son Alexei, who is ill with hemophilia, he gives it to his younger brother Mikhail. Mikhail in turn meets with the provisional government and says, "Thanks, but no thanks." He abdicates the next day. All across the land, the people rejoice at the end of the Tsarist autocracy. But Russia's involvement in the unpopular war and food shortages continue. Bread prices rise, and the people's call for land reform is left unaddressed. A constituent assembly made up of representatives from around the nation is planned to decide the permanent government. April. The Germans, Russia's wartime enemy, help Lenin to return from exile in an attempt to further weaken the chaotic country. Lenin, having missed out on the February Revolution, denounces all sides but his, the Bolshevik Party. In his famous April Theses, he calls for the overthrowing of the provisional government, with instead all power to the Soviets. He tries to rile up the masses once again to incite another spontaneous coup. This doesn't work. Lenin pushes on. He demands that Russia leave the war immediately. This position instantly wins him troop support, a military connection he will use later. Throughout the summer, the Bolsheviks continue to poke and prod to set off mass demonstrations and remove the provisional government. In June, the Minister of War, Alexander Kerensky, orders the new offensive in the war. Major fail. Lenin acts fast to try to agitate the masses. The Bolsheviks, along with the soldiers and sailors of Kronstadt, attempt a coup with the July Putsch. They fail. Kerensky responds by arresting the guilty Bolsheviks, except for Lenin, who manages to escape and hide out in Finland. Kerensky is promoted to prime minister, replacing Prince Lvov, whose 4 months as prime minister turned his hair completely white. The country is in turmoil. Discontent and disillusionment abound, with failures on the front, famines at home, chaos in the factories and the street, and increasing class polarization. In August, there is the chaotic Kornilov affair, in which General Kornilov attempts to crush the Petrograd Soviet and overthrow the provisional government. The provisional government turns to the Petrograd Soviet, including the Bolsheviks, for help stopping him. Result: Kornilov fails and support for the Bolsheviks increases, while support of Kerensky and the now obviously weak provisional government decreases. End of summer. The Bolsheviks are gaining popularity and win a majority in the Petrograd Soviet, which is a powerful council of workers and soldiers with whom the provisional government shares power. From his hiding spot in Finland, Lenin sees a golden opportunity for the Bolsheviks' revolution before the Constituent Assembly's November elections. Lenin's followers hide out at the Smolny Institute, a former school for girls. October 24th. Lenin, back in the capital, disguises himself as a drunk with a toothache and heads to the Smolny Institute. Bolshevik troops creep out in the night and begin occupying strategic points in the capital. Bridges, railway stations, the army headquarters. No shots are fired. October 25th. By morning, Kerensky has fled the Winter Palace, the only government building not yet occupied. By this time, the palace is only protected by junkers, who are local military academy cadets. The Bolsheviks position the cruiser Aurora outside the palace. No one wants to fire on the other. Finally, at 2 a.m. on October 26th, with little or no violence, the revolutionaries break into the palace and arrest the remaining ministers. They are taken to prison cells in the Peter and Paul fortress. Kerensky never returns. A pretty low-key anticlimactic event, more of a coup than a revolution. Afterwards, the Second Congress of Soviets makes a decree for land, which officially socializes all land for redistribution to peasant communes. A new provisional government is established, the Soviet People's Commissars, SPC. Lenin is chairman, and all the members are Bolshevik. They still plan to attend the Constituent Assembly's November election. A decree for peace is declared, and Lenin gets to work ending Russia's involvement in the war. In November, the elections for members of the Constituent Assembly are held. But when the Bolsheviks receive a mere 23% of the votes, they declare one of the opposition parties, the Cadets, illegal and demand the assembly voluntarily give up its authority. The assembly refuses, but does not challenge the Bolsheviks. Once the assembly adjourns, the Bolsheviks declare it dissolved. The Third Congress of Soviets replaces the assembly. This group removes the word provisional from the description of the SPC and thereby makes Lenin and the Bolsheviks the permanent rulers of the country. And then there were 3 years of civil war.
What are vaccines and how?
Sorry. Okay. So, all right. That is end of our today's session. And inshallah, Jazakallah khair for listening. And we will end with this 2 video. Hopefully, you will be able to join our next week. Stay safe until then. Assalamu alaikum.